Newsmakers this week is Congressman Steny Hoyer of Maryland, the minority whip in the House of Representatives. We're talking to him on Thursday afternoon as his members have had just less than 24 hours to absorb the message from the president on his strategy for ISIS. Let me introduce you to the two reporters who will be questioning Mr. Hoyer. Emma Dumaine covers Congress for Roll Call. Paul Kane covers the institution for the Washington Post. And Emma, you're up first.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you, Emma.
You're welcome. I wanted to start out by asking you, you've had a chance to hear the president's remarks last night. As Susan said, you and your colleagues have just started to digest and absorb the information. You've had some classified briefings. There's discussions about how to proceed. How would you like to proceed in regard to combating the insurgency in Syria and in Iraq? And how do you want Democrats, how do you hope that Congress will proceed when you all return to work on Monday?
Well, the good news is I've had discussions with the majority leader. I've been involved in briefings. I think there is a bipartisan sense that the American people agree with that ISIL needs to be confronted and needs to be defeated. It needs to be removed as a threat to regional security in the Middle East and as a security threat to the United States of America. So I am hopeful, when you ask me how I would like to see it proceed, is that we proceed in a bipartisan way to, as the President said last night, show a united country to the world that we are resolved and we are united in meeting this threat and eliminating this threat. And I think that there will be obviously debates about ways and means to do that, but I believe that we will be united, an overwhelming majority, for meeting the threat as the President suggests.
Can you give us a little bit more information, though, in terms of what you would like to see? Some of the options are to just take the idea for authorizing, arming, and training of the rebels and putting it into the CR, the resolution funding the government. Other people say this is a big enough issue that we should split them up and have two separate votes. And there are still others. I talked to Jim Moran in Arlington, Alexandria, and he said that they should come back and have a full authorization of force debate in November after the election.
Well, I believe that the two-step process is what we will, I think, pursue, and that is, I think that there will be a consideration of the President's request to train and equip regional players, that is, people who are from Syria, Iraq, and other Middle Eastern countries, Arab nations, who will, I think, be the boots on the ground that people talk about. I think we will be the facilitators, the supporters, and yes, help coordinate a large coalition which the President and the Secretary of State are now putting together. We have some significant number of nations who have already indicated that they want to participate. So I think that will be the first thing that we will consider, probably and hopefully next week. That is authorizing the President under Article 10 to equip and train in a overt way as opposed to covert way people to take on ISIL. Yes, we have air power, we have other assets, but the boots on the ground are going to be the boots on the ground who live in the neighborhood, who have a vested interest. And now that we have an Iraqi government that is trying to and hopefully will represent both Sunni and Shia interests, and that Sunni and Shia will feel that they are in this partnership to confront ISIL, a terrorist criminal element within their midst. I think we will proceed on that. Then secondly, I think at some point in time, when we come back after the elections, I think there will be a consideration of a larger use of force. We passed an amendment through the House of Representatives with a large bipartisan support before this immediate crisis confronted us and said that we ought to reconsider and reaffirm or change and modify or withdraw the use of force authorization that was passed in 2001. So I think Jim Moran is correct. I think it'll be a two-step process.
Congressman Hoyer, have you begun to have conversations with your colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus about what they would and wouldn't support in a continuing resolution. There are a lot of members who want that authorization to arm the Syrian rebels included in the continuing resolution. It's something that the President has explicitly requested. There are other members who say they don't want to take any vote relating to this crisis as it's evolving abroad until they have that vote on authorizing the use of military force, particularly members who don't really want any military intervention and want to go on record saying so.
I frankly think the majority of our members are prepared to support the President's request to train and equip other nations' fighters in Syria and in other places in the Middle East, including Iraq. I think many of those members also believe that we ought to have a vote before the end of the year on the authorization of the use of military force so that the Congress can speak and represent the views of the American people in that regard. So I think we have a lot of members who believe both those things ought to happen, but not necessarily demanding that they happen at the same time.
Do you have a sense, though, of how broad that use of force resolution would be in November? That's I think you'd start to lose some of your bipartisan coalition there, because the Republicans will probably want to go a lot further than some of the Democrats. How do you sort of tie that together so that it maintains both bipartisanship and it definitely passes?
By discussion, by hearings, by working together towards that end to reach a bipartisan and majority consensus in the House of Representatives as to what that authorization for the use of force ought to say. You're absolutely correct. There will be some who will have a much more restricted view and some who will have a much more expansive view. But when you ask how we're going to get there, I'm hopeful and we'll be working towards discussions with my own party, with Leader Pelosi, myself, the other leadership, discussing with our membership that we reach a consensus. That does not mean that everybody will agree, but that we will have a broad agreement on the parameters. Then hopefully we can also agree with the Republicans who may want a different set of words in a resolution, but I'm hopeful that we can work together in good faith as Americans confronted with a security challenge and come to an agreement. So we're going to work hard at that, and I think we can get it done.
I'd like to follow up on that security challenge. Since we're talking on the anniversary of 9/11, the President contended last night, Mr. Hoyer, that the country is safer today than it was 13 years ago. We've built up quite an infrastructure to defend against that kind of threat, but has the threat changed, and in fact, to a degree that, in fact, Americans may not be as safe as he contends?
Well, I think the President was correct that we are safer in the sense that, as you just mentioned, we have built up an infrastructure. I think we're much more on guard. Obviously, we are trying to make our airways as safe as possible. But in addition, I think we're paying much greater attention, much more focused in preventing a terrorist threat on the homeland. And I think we've done a good job at that through 2 administrations. We haven't had a major strike on our country, but we need to be vigilant. But I think the President was correct. Now, I think also it is correct to say that the Middle East is a much more complicated and destabilized area than it was 13 years ago on 9/11. To that extent, the challenge is greater, and the President is suggesting ways and means to meet that challenge. But it is a much more complex world that he faces today and that we face today than we did, in my view, in 2001.
Congressman, do you anticipate that Republicans will need Democrats' help to pass the continuing resolution?
I believe that's the case. Mr. McCarthy has not told me that's the case, but I believe it to be the case. The Club for Growth, Heritage Action, other groups have come out against the CR if it contains a reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. On our side, as you know, the Democrats believe very strongly that the Export-Import Bank is a very important component of growing jobs and assuring that America is competitive in international markets. when we passed it before, just a couple of years ago, Mr. Cantor and I worked on the reauthorization together. He was then the majority leader. We worked on it together, and very frankly, it passed with over 330 or 340 votes, overwhelming majority, with a significant majority of Republicans voting for that, and every Democrat voting for that. Unfortunately, for ideological reasons, in my view, it has become very controversial on the Republican side of the aisle. But I am hopeful, and I believe there is still a majority in the House of Representatives. There are 41 Republicans that have urged a long-term reauthorization of Export-Import Bank. Every Democrat, in my view, is for extending Export-Import Bank. That would give us at least 230 votes, and I'm hopeful that the Republican leadership would bring that option to the floor, because I believe it represents not only the majority of opinion in the House of Representatives, but a way to help create jobs and assure our competitiveness in global markets.
Let's assume for the moment that you do pass the resolution funding the government next week, and that you also, whether it's inside the CR or not, that there is this authority for training the rebels. Why not spend October considering the use of force authorization? I mean, compared to this, in 2002, just before that midterm election, you guys held a vote then and got a bipartisan result. Is that just a bad time to do that sort of politics?
Look, I really think what America is all about is democracy, listening to our people. It's about elections where the people come to the polls and make decisions as to where they want their country to go. So very frankly, I think you're going to see a very robust discussion of exactly that issue among the American people, and that after the election we'll come back into session better informed of the public's view and our constituents' attitudes about what they think ought to be done. I think that will be helpful to the final result, frankly. So listening to America's advice and counsel is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Looking ahead terms, I know that you would hope that the House would go back into Democratic control, assuming that it stays in control of, and Republicans stay in control, and the Senate also goes into Republican hands. How do you anticipate the next Congress playing out, and even sort of work in the lame duck, trying to finish up sort of certain priorities with a Democratic-controlled Senate before you go into a brave new world in January?
Look, I think the American people are rightfully disgusted and disappointed with their board of directors, the Congress of the United States. I frankly think our Republican friends have led the most ineffective House of Representatives in which I've served since I came here in 1981. We frankly ignored the views of the American people. We've refused to consider legislation which has a majority of the support in the House of Representatives. I think it's very unfortunate. Minimum wage clearly needs to be addressed. It hasn't been addressed for a lot of years now. Last addressed in 2007, 2009, and we need to do that. Comprehensive immigration reform. Everybody admits that the immigration system in our country is broken. The United States Senate, by a 2-to-1 majority, passed over a comprehensive immigration bill. The Republicans themselves have passed some 5 or 6 bills out of their committees. However, the Republican leadership has not brought either the Senate comprehensive bill, the House comprehensive bill that we've introduced, including the border security provisions passed out of the Republican Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives, and the other parts of the Senate bill, which were passed by bipartisan numbers. They've refused to bring that to the floor. They've refused to bring minimum wage. They've refused to bring unemployment insurance extension to the floor, and so many other pieces of legislation that Americans support to grow our economy, to create jobs, and move our economy forward. And that's unfortunate. I'm hopeful that the outcome of the election will be such that we move together in a much more positive fashion and bring to the floor legislation that has bipartisan support, that can pass the House of Representatives, and not simply because you have the power to do so, exclude from consideration legislation which will help our economy, fix a broken immigration system, and ensure that people are getting enough money to live on and not live in poverty while they're working 40 hours a week, to make sure that women get equal pay, to make sure, in short, that we do the things the American people wants us to do.
We have 10 minutes left.
Okay. How difficult is it for your members, those running for re-election in the House, those running in open seats, and also some like Bruce Braley running for Senate races, to have Barack Obama at this point be a very unpopular president hovering around 40% approval ratings, where you've got a situation where Michelle Obama so far seems to be doing more campaigning for Democrats than the president himself?
Look, I think we have some excellent candidates. Bruce Braley, obviously, an excellent candidate for Senate. I think he's going to win that Iowa seat that Senator Harkin is vacating. But we have excellent candidates around this country, very substantive, experienced, common sense, feet on the ground candidates. I think a lot of them are going to win. We're going to surprise some people with how many seats we win. But having said that, I think this did what the American people wanted last night. I think they saw a leader looking at a security challenge and saying we're going to confront it and we're going to defeat it. I think they've seen a president who has led us over the last 5.5 years from an economy that is the worst that almost every American has seen in their lifetime. You have to be 90 years of older to have seen a worse economy than President Obama inherited. Notwithstanding that, working with us in the Congress, Democrats and some Republicans, we built up this economy. The last 50-plus months, we've had a growing economy. We've averaged in the last year over 200,000 jobs created per month. The stock market has almost tripled in terms of value, so that much of our economy is doing well. But we haven't passed the kind of jobs legislation that will make sure that those who have not been lifted up by the growth in our economy, the increase in jobs, have an opportunity, have a rung on a ladder to get to middle-class status and the status in which they can support themselves and their families. So this president has made some very tough decisions, has been confronted with, as I say, the worst economy that this nation's had, has brought us back, and is now confronting one of the most complicated national security problems we've had. So I think the American people are seeing leadership in this president.
On the subject of what role President Obama and his popularity might have in predicting the results we see in the outcome of the midterm elections in November, what did you think of President Obama's decision to delay taking executive actions on immigration out of respect for the position it was putting some vulnerable Democrats in on the campaign trail?
Well, look, the bottom line is this president, the United States Senate, and House Democrats are committed to comprehensive immigration reform sooner rather than later. We also believe that the president has the authority to take action, and that he ought to take action before the end of this year to make sure that if the House finds itself unwilling or unable to act, that makes sure that we have a humanitarian system before we make it a working system. We ought not to wait to make it a working system. The fact of the matter is that this president, I think, is very focused on this. We're very focused on this. The American people overwhelmingly support comprehensive immigration reform, and the Congress has the responsibility, both constitutionally and I would say morally, to act to fix a broken system, which is a large part of our challenge. And I think the president will address it before the end of the year.
Looking at immigration and also this potential use of force debate, in each instance you see the kicking of the can past the election. When does the fever break on Capitol Hill? When are we able to actually deal with things when they need to be dealt with? If 6 years ago at this time Wall Street was imploding and Congress came together in a bipartisan way, kind of missed on the first try, but came back a couple days later and passed the Wall Street bail. If that were to happen today, would we kick the can down past the election?
Well, as you know, when you say it a bipartisan way, that's true. But it was a Republican president, came to the Congress with Secretary Paulson and Ben Bernanke, then the head of the Federal Reserve, and said, if you don't act, Congress, the country's going to go into a depression, not a deep recession, but a depression. And what happened? 2/3 of the, indeed more than 2/3 on the second vote, as you pointed out, voted to support the policy that the President of the United States, a Republican president, recommended. On the other hand, 2/3 of his own party opposed him, as you know. And that only passed, and we only, in my opinion, saved the economy of America from going into depression because of the willingness of Democrats to vote in a bipartisan fashion with a Republican president on the policy that he proposed. Unfortunately, when President Obama became president of the United States in January of 2009 and February of 2009, when we were acting to staunch the hemorrhaging of the economics of our country, they weren't there at all. Zero in the House of Representatives. No support, no ability, notwithstanding the fact the president reached out and said, let's work together. There was no response in a positive fashion. However, your question is, can we do it in the future? First of all, let me say, I tell my colleagues, you cannot solve America's problems in a 24-month cycle. And what I mean by that, we can't always have our eye focused on the election. We've got to make tough decisions for our children and our grandchildren and our country's sake. Because those decisions are tough, they are made much more manageable and possible if we act together in a bipartisan fashion. That has been my intent throughout my career when I was in the state Senate, when I've been in the Congress. Roy Blunt, who's now a senator from Missouri, who used to be the minority and majority whip, he and I had the opportunity to work together closely. I'm hopeful that I will be able to work with the new majority leader, Mr. McCarthy, in the same kind of bipartisan fashion, because you're right. We need to come together to solve America's problems. And if we, America is going to be and Americans, a lot happier with us, and properly so.
Have you had a chance to assess whether or not things will be different under Mr. McCarthy?
Well, it's pretty soon to assess that, and we really haven't had an opportunity. This is probably the first opportunity we've had to work in a real bipartisan fashion. I'm hopeful over the next week that we start to forge such a relationship. Mr. McCarthy has indicated he wants to do that. Mr. Scalise, the new Republican whip, has also indicated he wants to do that. And I will tell you that Leader Pelosi and I and other Democratic leaders will be positive in our response if, in fact, we find a receptive audience to a bipartisan process.
We have 2 minutes. Final questions from you both.
The first exercise in whipping with the new majority leadership team, we had some drama over this bill to fund resources at the border with the child migrant crisis. They had to add this other bill to roll back the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and people were wondering whether this was a new Republican leadership team that could whip and could keep it together. Did that give you sort of any early indication of what you were up against here and what kind of leadership the Republican conference was going to have over?
Well, I'm prepared to give Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Scalise the benefit of the doubt. But what we learned from that incident was, unfortunately, that the Republicans did what they have done so often, turned towards their far right, not towards consensus, not towards bipartisanship, in order to pass something through the House of Representatives. Very frankly, what we need to do is meet and discuss and resolve, not simply to move towards the most radical part of the Republican Party to pass legislation. That's what happened in that instance, and I think that was unfortunate. But I'm hopeful that Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Scalise, the majority leader, majority whip, who have both told me they want to try to work together, that they not only mean that, I believe they do, but that they can do that, and I look forward to trying to do so.
All right, Mr. Hoyer, you referenced 1981 as when you started this job. How much longer do you want to keep going?
Well, I enjoy this job, notwithstanding the fact that
I'm not trying to get rid of you.
it's frustrating. Well, I appreciate that, but I'm healthy. I enjoy this job. I think this job gives me an opportunity to serve my country and my state and the people, my neighbors. And as long as they're willing to have me and my health is good and I'm able to do it, that will take care of itself.
All right.
That's it for our time. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman Steny Hoyer, the Minority Whip in the House of Representatives. We appreciate your time this week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.